Let's talk more about those movements now. We've got Viv Govender from Rand Swiss who joins us this evening to unpack the market movements. You've just heard me speak about the price of Brent crude, Viv, and how that's had an implication on not only the inflation outlook across the world, but also really market participants watching cautiously what's happening because of the Russian invasion. Your thoughts on the commodities space, but also just a general outlook as to how the JSE started off the trading week?
Yes, I mean, in terms of commodities, as you mentioned here, you're seeing quite a sharp increase in some basic commodities, especially in the food sector. And that's going to be really problematic going forward, especially for a country like South Africa. As David Shapiro mentioned, different countries have different kind of spending profiles. So, for instance, in the developed world, Europe and America, 5 to 10% of income is spent on food. In some place like Nigeria, half of the income is spent on food. You put food prices up 10%, and you go from maybe 5 to 5.5% in like the US. You go from basically 55 to say 61% in like Nigeria. So that's a very different kind of experience, in terms of spending, in terms of the impact of these kind of movements coming through. And with regards to the petrol price that we talked about, yes, the department can come out and talk about, how do you save food, etc., fuel, don't drive as much, carpool, etc., etc. But understand that fuel feeds into a lot of other sectors. Everything that you eat, everything you consume is transported, and those prices are going to go higher to basically compensate for the higher food prices as well.
No, absolutely. I thought, what did you make of the performance of the financial stocks today, Viv, doing rather well? I suppose part of it is drawing on the positivity that we're seeing in the local unit, which unfortunately won't be helping us with the petrol price this month.
Oh, yes, not just yet. And of course, what's happening right now is that we've had about, a couple of months of falling markets, especially in the US. And we had last week a bit of a change in that. So, after like 8 weeks, we had a change where we had a positive week, and the market's kind of continuing that at the moment. One of the reasons that we're seeing this positivity come through, unfortunately, is things like the interest rates are not going to be rising. And I say unfortunately, it's because the reasons for interest rates not rising as much as had been, planned was because the US economy is not growing as fast as had been hoped. That is something that I think people must understand, that when it comes to a choice between economic growth and interest rates, the market prefers to have lower interest rates than higher economic growth. Because like with a 1% movement in interest rates changes multiples by 10 to 15% for pricing these stocks.
No, absolutely. Viv, some company updates out today. Oceana putting out a statement that it's not longer going to have PwC as its external auditor. Obviously, there are many accounting issues that are alleged to be happening within the organization, but they say that the relationship was strained. And of course, it's still in hot water with the likes of the JSE, which had previously warned to suspend its listing from the JSE. Your thoughts on this development and really just the outlook for Oceana?
Look, I mean, with regards to reporting, any company that has any reporting issues, I usually try and, stay away from. The reason being is that as an investor, unless you're an analyst that goes to the factories and understand what exactly the production is going to be like in each individual plant, whenever there's any question about the validity of the reporting that comes out of a company, you as a normal investor just looking at multiple stocks across multiple sectors and multiple jurisdictions have very little idea as to what's actually happening in the company. We've seen that with Steinhoff. We've seen that, obviously it's probably not going to be as bad as Steinhoff, but we've seen that with like a number of other companies in South Africa where we've seen the books not being correctly reflecting the reality of the company. And in all those cases, it's usually best to stay away. I must also point out another fact here. This is not the first company. Like we talked about Steinhoff as being obviously the worst, but there's been a number of companies, that have had similar kind of situations in recent times in South Africa. And that is a big problem for the JSE, because if you can't trust, the books of listed companies, there's a huge risk profile, premium that you're going to pay basically, or be willing to receive to get into those companies. So the cost of capital, the likelihood of investors getting into these businesses goes on dramatically. And that's one of the bad parts of these kind of disclosures.
No, absolutely. And it comes at a time when the JSE is actually trying to amend some of the listing requirement to be less rigid in the red tape that it takes to list on the JSE. So I think it's a tough balancing act for the local boards, but I suppose we'll see how these stories develop. And then finally, MMH, Momentum Metropolitan Holdings, releasing numbers today. What did you make of it? The big story around claims is still quite prominent. But what say you of the company's outlook in the current environment?
Look, I mean, a company like Momentum, there's opportunity in South Africa and Africa that's quite large. There's quite a great deal of, underexploited potential in the financial sector. Many people don't have enough investments, they don't have enough insurance, et cetera, to basically suit their current needs. That being said, any kind of downturn, any kind of like squeeze on the consumer, what you've tended to find in the past is that insurance premiums, investment, debit orders, etc., have been one of the first things that consumers are willing to basically cut. I mean, you're not going to cut the amount of money you spend feeding your kids, but you might want to cut down, for instance, on the premium you pay for insurance, risking a few months, maybe a year or so, while you basically want to take care of the other necessities in your life. So I think any kind of company like Momentum that is gearing off the consumer in an environment where the consumer is under pressure because of higher costs, because of things like the petrol price, as well as likely lower economic growth. We've seen the IMF come out recently with lowering global economic growth numbers and so on. I think that's going to be a difficult road to travel if you are a company that depends on consumers.
No, absolutely. Viv Govender from Rand Swiss, as always, thank you for your time this evening. That's Viv Govender giving us a wrap of the markets day that was, and I'll be back in the next bulletin with The Economist to just break down what the outlook for the South African consumer and the economy at large look like.